everything went wrong when she refused to sign an NDA because he didn't think that he could trust her, and he wanted assurance that she wouldn't sell anything to the press or speak about their relationship with her friends and family, who could then sell it to the press. Now, I think that if you feel in a relationship that you need someone to sign a contract, then the trust maybe isn't there to begin with.
Well, I mean, it really is a bad move, isn't it? And I mean, what did he think she would say? Did he really think that she cared that much about the money that she would sign away the rest of her life to the guy? And I mean, she knows, and probably is about to make a deal with some newspaper, because presumably she'll now feel quite happy to go and spill her guts about everything that happened.
Well, he's a national treasure, as you pointed out. He's worth £10 million. He's got a huge fan base. I mean, everyone wants to know what it's like to go out with Paul Hollywood. So he probably is pretty nervous right now. He's actually...
Do you think he might have sacked his advisors?
Potentially.
So why did you tell me to tell her to sign that?
Well, we've done a story today that a lot of his colleagues on Bake Off and people around him apparently had bets on to see how long it would last, because they were sceptical about the romance.
Is that right?
I mean, I don't know why they were sceptical hooking up with a barmaid 30 years your junior. But he's also made a comment today on Instagram. He's saying that my silence on any matters is not a sign of weakness or agreement of what's been said. I prefer a quiet life away from my day job. And then he said, and he sort of pointed some finger here. He's saying, I know the public can't be duped into believing what's out there from a person making money selling stories and continuously courting the paps. There are always two sides to every story, and you've only heard one. So he's kind of pointing a finger potentially at Summer there. I don't know.
Well, certainly there are some great pictures in the Sun today of sort of dog wars, aren't there? So when she's out walking one dog, there's somebody else out walking another dog.
Yeah.
And I mean, as we know in this business, there are often those who will tip photographers off as to where they're likely to be, because she's very well turned out for somebody. When I go out walking a dog, I'm not usually wearing a very tight-fitting pair of jeans, some really good boots, a crop top, and some very nice sunglasses.
Indeed, you might have even thought she was expecting to have a photo taken, mightn't you?
You might think that.
I was my father's carer. He had vascular dementia and has his illness increased rapidly in the last 6 months of his life. It was very hard to entertain him in the house during the day.
Sure.
There was nothing really we could do. He just wanted to wander and all the time.
Yes.
So we found there was a private provision, that a day centre. So he would go there 10 till 4. But obviously we had to fund that at the cost of £200 a week.
Right, okay. And how long did you have to do that for?
For about 5 months,
Right.
because unfortunately his illness took on and he passed away.
That's quite a lot of money, though, isn't it?
It is. Social services in Newport do provide the same provision. However, the waiting list is humongous.
Right.
And he did go with the social services one day a week, but then we had to also pay an additional £80 a week because we had to have carers in twice a day to help us.
Right.
So on top of the private provision, we were also paying social services as well. But the differences from the social service day centre to the private day centre were enormous. The private day centre was a godsend to us because it gave us a bit of respite, but it also helped my dad.
Yes. Well, that's what I was saying before about it would be nice, I think, because my father had a dementia as well before he died, and he sounds similar to your father. He in the end, he just kind of expired after a while, but he couldn't stay. He couldn't stay at home anymore. His wife was still alive, but she was elderly, because he was like your dad. He kept wandering off. Police kept picking him up on the motorway and stuff and bringing him back. And in the end, it's very stressful for everybody involved, isn't it?
Well, yeah, his entire interests in things just completely evaporated.
Yeah.
But when he went to the day centre, because he had that one-on-one, I guess, care all day in terms of just, doing simple things like arts and crafts and, just playing with the ball. He really came out of himself.
Yeah.
And he really enjoyed it there. We couldn't never put him into a care provision because I made that promise to my dad. But also, obviously, as you know, with dementia, when they have one big move from their home into a care home, their illness can just deteriorate rapidly because their surroundings change.
No, of course. I just wonder whether some of these charities who collect so much money could use some of that money to set up centres like that, which could be used by people like yourselves and families like your own, but for maybe a bit less money.
I think so, definitely. And also, I think sometimes people do forget about the carers. and kind of like what they are going through.
Yeah.
Because obviously it is so stressful for the actual person with dementia, but to see that person change into somebody completely different, and it's like that they've already passed, if that makes sense.
It's horrible,
and, like,
yeah.
you're
It's awful.
grieving.
Yeah. It really
Yeah.
is. It's hard to explain to people unless they've been through it.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're
Yeah.
lucky in a way, Nicola, that you and the rest of your family came through it sort of unscathed, if they did, because a lot of families don't. A lot of families find that the stress and the pressure on them individually means that they end up breaking up in some way.
Yeah, that's very true. And my mother never fully understood the full effect of dementia. So we would have very heated arguments about how to care for Dad,
Right.
because she just didn't understand. But more information and more education of people is really needed, because people don't understand. And when we were in public places, my dad used to like to wave and say hello to like kids and stuff,
Yeah.
because he's a bit of a kid himself.
Sure.
But people would be very weary of him, and I always used to wear like a little dementia badge.
Right.
I'd be like, oh, it's okay. He's not, he's not a predator. He's just.
I know.
Just suffering
It's
with
shocking,
illness.
really. It's such a sad story, and it so often happens to... There'll be families listening to this, Nicola, now, I can promise you, who absolutely have had exactly the same experience. And it just seems to me that you could all help each other, and we could all help each other, if we were able to meet somewhere, talk somewhere, take our ageing relatives, and just have even a few hours respite, you know?
Yeah, the Alzheimer's Society do like cafes and things, and,
Yeah.
and they try and encourage carers and the dementia patients to go to them. But there's different. We did take Dad to one once in his better days,
Yes.
and there's different degrees of different levels, if that makes sense, of where the illness is at. And it was too much for my dad. He didn't like it at all, so we came away from there.
Right.
But definitely more awareness about day centres, that social services, there are provisions for people if they need day centres. These day centres are available through social services, but they're not very forthcoming with the information.
No, okay. Well, listen, Nicola, thank you so much for calling. It's a fantastic call, really heartfelt, and something that must, if you're listening to Nicola there, you must feel for everybody who has to go through what she went through. And you also, of course, have to have sympathy for the Alzheimer's patient or the dementia patient themselves, but the family as well. We definitely need to do something here. We can, I'm sure, come up with better ideas for care, even if it's temporary, for some of these families, and for the way that they have to deal with it single-handedly on their own, sometimes because they don't have the money to do what Nicola did, even though, she was able to do so. Don't think everybody else can.
Here in Yorkshire, there is a Yorkshire Party, and it is gaining traction, believe it or not.
Okay.
But it's pointing to Scotland, and it's saying, why are they getting over £1,000 per person more, just simply for being in Scotland? Why do they get so much more money via the Barnett formula? Why can't we have some of that? Members of my family in Cumbria, they only have to travel a few miles, and yet they just 10 miles further north, there's free parking, there's free prescriptions,
Yeah.
their children can go to universities for free,
Yeah.
even though our children will go to a university in Scotland, have to pay a full whack. And people in parts of England are waking up and saying, this isn't a fair settlement for
Right.
us. It needs looking at again in a fair and equitable manner, Mike.
Yes. I mean, you have to remember that Tony Blair, when he set up the whole devolution process, was doing it in order to avoid nationalism getting any bigger. But unfortunately, it didn't work out terribly well for him. But as a result, we've had Gordon Brown, we've had David Cameron, subsequently giving Scotland even more to try and keep them sweet. And that's why they've got such a great deal.
Yeah, Mike, I believe and have done for a long time that it was Tony Blair's biggest mistake, the devolution settlement. It just ignored huge other parts of the country. And, Mike, I'm going to say something that may sound flippant, but it isn't. It's based upon the fact that the Romans happened to stop somewhere. You know, if the Romans had carried on going up to the Orkneys, you know, it's just a false premise, Mike. And I know people in Scotland will be going mad. I mean, but it is. We could have drawn lines anywhere. We could have looked at other historic boundaries. It needs to be looked at properly, Mike, because it isn't fair for the whole country. Just because you happen to be born in one part of the country, you can get significantly more... basically more money spent on your local services.
Well, you don't have to be born there. You don't have to be born there. You just go and live there. I mean, for the same ludicrous reason that they allowed anyone that lived in Scotland to vote in the independence referendum. But if you were actually Scottish and living outside of Scotland, you couldn't vote on it. So you actually had no choice on the future development and direction of your own country.
The irony is that actually the the SNP government in Scotland has a mandate to go ahead with a referendum on the question of independence, but the Boris Johnson government in London does not have a mandate to go ahead with a hard deal or a no-deal Brexit.
Well, there's a sort of a mixed-up logic there, isn't there? Because you've just told us that there is now some kind of a mandate for a second referendum in Scotland, but the referendum we've already had gives him no mandate to leave the European Union.
It gives him no mandate to leave without a deal.
That's not true.
The people who campaigned to leave the EU and who won a slim majority in 2016 were saying that they wanted to leave in an orderly fashion, that they wanted to remain.
Do. Well, that's what they're still saying. They're still saying that.
Well, really, it doesn't look like it at the moment from where we sit.
Well, it may not look like it, but they're still saying that they want to leave with a deal. But they're also saying that they will be prepared to leave without a deal if the European Union chooses to be intransigent and chooses not to be in any way helpful.
That's what Boris Johnson says, Mike, but you judge people by what they do.
Right.
And from the look of what he's actually done and his refusal to enter into discussions with the European Union and setting these quite impossible preconditions to any talks taking place, it looks like he is prepared to go ahead with a no-deal.
Well, he's not talking to. He's not talking to them, Tommy,
Ireland.
because they said they weren't going to negotiate. They weren't going to renegotiate. They said they would not reopen the withdrawal agreement. So what's the point of talking to them?
Well, no, Mike, he said...
That's what they said.
No, he said that he would only talk to the EU if they dropped the whole question of the Irish.
But that was after they said.
You know,
But that was after they said they wouldn't change the withdrawal agreement.
Well, should he not actually be discussing this with them and see if?
Well, not after they've said they won't. Well, they've already said they won't. Well, no, they've said they won't discuss it. Therefore, he says in that case, there's no point in us talking unless you're willing to drop the backstop.
The point is that Boris Johnson doesn't represent people in Scotland with knobs on, and he is actually turbocharging the gulf between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, and he is fueling the case for Scottish independence by every day he holds in office.
There are kind of two types of immigration. I think the EU immigration and lots of immigration from Eastern Europe and stuff. The people are broadly kind of Christian. They broadly have kind of the same kind of sensibilities. I think the problems arise when you have millions of people coming from the kind of the Islamic third world and developing world, because Islam, I don't think, has ever gone through a renaissance. It hasn't really had a social or cultural evolution. People often turn up with their cultural baggage and they continue here.
Yes.
It's almost like I always wonder why people would move here for a better life only to keep their third world baggage with them. It seems counterintuitive. I mean, if you think about Islam, in 2 generations we've imported FGM, honour killing, sham marriage, suicide bombing, the full vow, the encroachment of halal meat. All of these things are basically...
But as our guest said, though, Rakib Hassan, you can't really say that every Muslim who comes to this country behaves in the same way, because that's not true. And most of the problem that we're talking about here with Neil Basu is people who are raised in this country, i.e. their parents might have come here, but they're born here. They are essentially British. Now, what I'm saying is that what's wrong with Basu's statement is he's making out as if we are in the wrong for trying to make their families and their older generations assimilate, and that's causing a knock-on effect to the youth. But I mean, you can't tell me that every Muslim that comes to this country is involved in what you're suggesting, because at the end of the day, they come here, they work, they are very peaceful, they have families. There's a very small number of them that go around doing horrible things. But the point is you can't blame us for that. They've got to blame themselves, surely.
Yeah, but I think what you're doing is you're falling into that trap of saying, well, it's not every Muslim. Only an idiot would think it would be every Muslim.
No, but I said that to you because you said Muslims and then made a load of statements which was as if they were all the same, which they're not. So you might as well say every white man behaves the same way. That's not true.
No, but it's not about the individual, right? It's not about the individual. But you can have an individual Muslim who's your friend, and you can also say to him, look what we've imported from the Islamic third world in the last 2 generations, and you'd be right on both counts. It doesn't mean that individual does. But I think we have to be honest about it. And I think if you look at other communities, I live near the biggest Korean community outside of Korea in New Malden, and you wouldn't even know they were there. They're quiet. You don't get these issues in other communities.
Yeah, but I bet they've got Korean shops, right? They would have Korean supermarkets. You could go to Chinatown in almost every city in this land. Nobody complains about Chinese people having their own shops. But people do complain about Muslim people having their own shops, don't they?
Yeah, but we don't see the same levels. we don't see the same levels of problems in other communities, do we? We haven't got these types of problems with Hindus. Why not? We haven't got these types of problems with Sikhs or
What type
with
of problem are you talking
Korean-
about?
Well, FGM, honour killing, Sam marriage, suicide bombing, the fact that they're blowing kids up for constant...
FGM is a massive problem in lots of parts of the world. It's not a Muslim problem.
Looking at Basu's statement, I think firstly his definition of assimilation is problematic.
Yeah.
I think that assimilation is very much the idea that certain attitudes and values in other parts of the world are simply they're simply not compatible with the British way of life.
Yes.
And some of those attitudes need to be reformed. I think the idea that we have an assimilationist approach to integration is nonsense. I think there's been too much state-sponsored multiculturalism in recent times more than anything.
Yeah.
And that's encouraged that separation that you talk about in certain parts of the country, you know, the existence of parallel societies. So I think that Basu's comments, I think they come across as quite confused.
Yes. Well, for one, he's saying that, you know, the trouble with a lot of the homegrown terrorism that we've faced in this country recently is that it is homegrown. He then says we've been trying too hard to make people assimilate. Well, obviously, if people were being made to assimilate, they wouldn't be trying to attack the very system that they're supposed to be a part of.
I feel that this country needs to talk more about national cohesion.
Yeah.
I think that all too often we've been championing difference. We've been overly celebratory of cultural diversity. I think we need to talk more about a civic patriotism. That's what I like to call it. Talking about, you know, a common set of values, a shared destiny, a common purpose. I think that's what's been really lacking from our political leadership in recent times.
Yeah, do you think
I think that could actually be quite helpful from a counter-terrorism and counter-extremism perspective.
No, I think I absolutely agree with you. And also, through the kind of Brexit prism that we're currently looking, it's a good opportunity to do that because, you know, people are often saying...
Brexit could be the catalyst for the social and political renewal that this country desperately needs.
I think you're absolutely right.
We make a decision. It's the only time in my life, and I think in history, under so-called democracy, where a decision is made, you know, a government is formed, and the actual vote is questioned. I mean, if we vote for a Labour government, if we vote for a Tory government, we do not get 2 and 3 years of questioning that we voted wrong. We don't get 5 years of you know, from about 1979 of Labour saying, oh, you shouldn't have voted for Mrs Thatcher, she was all wrong. We need to have a second vote. We don't get the referendums in Scotland and Wales. Geraint Davis is over there in Wales moaning about let's have a second referendum, but no one over in Wales ever said let's have a second referendum in Wales back in the 90s.
And also, when you see the margins by which they won, you know, the right to have their own assembly in Wales and the right to have their own parliament in Scotland, very, very narrow margins altogether that people voted for. But nobody ever questioned it. Nobody said, oh, this is a bit close. It's almost 50-50, you know, which is what they're now saying about this referendum. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, the sneaky one now is Cameron's. When people in Manchester and the North East said we don't want them there, sneaky Cameron decided he'd impose a mayor. Now, it's all very jolly. We've got a Lord Mayor down here and we've got a leader of the council, and it all sounds good, and they'll crack the whip. But it's almost like the police chiefs, you know, who, instead of having a committee, they have one person. And, of course, in Manchester it's Burnham. Apparently in South Yorkshire it's Jarvis, which means he's got a job as MP for Barnsley, and he hasn't cranked up the Sheffield end of that region yet.
Listen, it's unbelievable. Yes, what we need now is more tiers of government and more tiers of politicians, right?
I just want to say to you and the country and everybody else, what is the advantage? I'm looking through my crystal ball. There's no advantage of us coming out of the EU. You may as well stay in. There's only problems, and if we pull out, nobody knows how it's going to run.
Well, that's rubbish, actually, Susan. I'll let you answer that in a slightly more erudite way.
Susan, hello. I think there are advantages, but we haven't talked about them enough. So let me just run through one or two for you. First of all, when you're a member of the European Union, you cede what's called competencies to the EU, which means our own government can't do things because we've said, hey, you EU collectively can do them. The biggest one that people are talking about is actually trade deals. What's a trade deal? A trade deal is designed to make it easier for our companies to sell and buy off each other between different nations. The EU is historically really slow at doing deals, and it also has to get agreement between all 28 members. That means you have massive compromises and you end up with a deal that actually may not be that good for Britain. We can go out, strike out on our own and negotiate deals as the fifth largest economy in the world. We need to actually go out and make those deals and win those deals to make it easier for our business to continue the growth that we are seeing even now before we've left. We want to take that one further.
One of the problems is we don't have a police force anymore, thanks to Daisy May abolishing them and ordering it to a police service.
Yes.
The other thing is, this is a justification for the police officers to be armed. If he'd had a sidearm, he could have protected himself.
Yes, and could have shot the man dead. Yes, I mean, would you be concerned if we had an armed police force in this country?
I'd be relieved if we had an armed police force. I think it would be a good idea. Yeah. And that guy coming at him with a machete, if he pulled his gun and said stop, he would probably have stopped.
Yes. Yeah,
and
because I mean,
he wouldn't have to go to hospital and put his life in danger. If he refused to stop and continued to threaten to attack him, he could have shot him, and that would have been the end of him. That would have been a good day's work.
I think you're absolutely right. And also, it would be a warning, so every other scumbag who wants to go out who thinks that they can harm the police without any fear or favour.
Because discipline and respect in the country is being lost since, I believe, they did away with corporal punishment in schools. Going back a couple of decades, those kids that had no discipline and respect in those years are now producing kids that don't get any discipline and respect either. There's no respect for the elderly, no respect for authority, no respect for teachers. Discipline's breaking down in lots of schools. Suspend the kids, they get no education, and this is the result.
Yes, I think, Alan, you're absolutely spot on. Thank you very much indeed for that call. Alan, I think, makes a very good point. Let's put it out there for conversation and discussion. Should we just get an armed police organised situation going on so that every single police officer is actually armed? Every single police officer carries a sidearm, as they do in many countries of the world. If you go to France, if you go to Germany, if you go to Italy, if you go to the United States of America, loads and loads of individual, ordinary police officers walking the street, have a holster in which they keep a handgun, which is usually sort of, locked shut at any given point. They don't pull it out whenever they feel like it. However, they can shoot people if they want to. I think that's the way we're going to have to go, isn't it?
Every policeman in Northern Ireland has a sidearm. Every single one of them.
Right.
Now, I'm not someone who actually trusts the police a great deal, but I trusted them enough to be armed.
Yes. Have they always been armed over there? Is it just since the PSNI was instituted?
No. From day one,
when they were the RUC?
Yes, absolutely. They all had a sidearm. Now, everyone listening to the show, I assume, would be pleased if the police gunned down a jihadist in the street in Borough Market.
Yeah.
No one would complain against that. So why can't the police gun down these people marauding through the streets of London with huge knives?
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think last night in Leighton High Road, if the guy who you were trying to get out of a van came at you with a machete with the intent of using it on you, I think as a police officer, you would be entirely within your rights to shoot him.
Well, if it was a Northern Irish policeman, he would just pull his sidearm out and riddle him full of bullets.
Yeah. Well, you don't even have to do that. I mean, you just shoot them once and put them down. You don't actually have to kill them, do you?
Yeah, and if these idiots were being shot, regularly, they would start sharing these videos of this happening.
Yes.
And it just might put them off.
I think you're absolutely right, because there's no deterrent better than death, in my view. I know that some people say, oh, well, the death penalty doesn't work, and that may well be true because it's after the fact. But if you think there's a pretty good chance you're going to be gunned down on the street by committing a crime against the police, I think you won't be committing the crime.
Of course, and it's only a short-term solution here. Obviously, I think everyone listening to this show realises it's some problem with our society. Just like in America, there's some problem with American society.
Yes.
We need to sort that out.
Right.
Because, for example, people are complaining at the moment about all the guns in the US.
Yeah.
Well, Switzerland has got more guns per head of population.
Yes, and Canada also does.
Yes, and the average young military age Swiss has to keep an assault rifle in their house.
Well, I've seen pictures of people walking down the street in Switzerland. Paddy, I've got to go, thanks. Seeing people walking down the street in Switzerland with rifles over their shoulder. And they're quite happily able to get on a bus. They're quite happily able to walk into a store, walk into any kind of shop. You know, I mean, I've been in Texas where they have signs as you walk into bars that say, please check your weapon with the cloakroom. You know, and people put their guns in the cloakroom so they don't get carried away while they're in the bar and decide to start shooting people. It's perfectly possible to do that. But I think the time has now come, has it not, for the police to be armed in this country, because we can't have people walking around waving machetes, for heaven's sake. John is in Canterbury, wants to talk about giving up meat. Hello, John.
Hi, how are you?
Very well indeed. What do you want to tell me?
So I gave up meat after I looked at my carbon footprint on my environmental science course at uni.
Did you?
Yeah, so I did environmental science, and I found the biggest thing I could do to reduce it was to stop eating meat.
Uh-huh. What is your carbon footprint?
So the main thing was meat eating, then it was flying.
No, but I mean, does it have a number, I mean?
No, it's done as a pie chart.
A pie chart? No, but I mean, but when you say your carbon footprint, surely there's an amount of carbon that you create. You can't remember?
No, I was looking more at the proportions. Over
I see. All right, so how did it break down then? I'll do a little pie chart while we speak.
So the largest thing was meat eating.
Uh-huh.
And then flying, because I've been on quite a few exotic holidays, was quite similar to the amount of fossil fuels I'd used.
Exotic holidays?
Well, I mean, not super exotic, but places like Morocco and stuff.
Right, so what proportion was meat then?
It was about a quarter.
Okay, so I'm going to put down a quarter, 25%.
Slightly more than a quarter, yeah.
All right, flying was how much?
Off the top of my head, I don't know the exact, but it was about 15, 20.
Right, okay. Next. What else?
So similar was fossil fuels.
Isn't that part of flying?
No, so I'm talking about like energy production.
All right, so another 15% fossil fuels. Okay.
Yep.
So we're up to 55% so far.
Yeah.
What else?
So transport would have been just non-flying transport.
Well, hang on. You can't have flying and transport and fossil fuels. That's three same categories, isn't it?
Well, they just asked you lots of questions and then know if they had flying.
Well, I hope you were better at answer than you are today.
One thing quick on the mobile phone.
Yes.
Is I got sent a text from Vodafone 2 weeks ago that said, randomly out of the blue, we have now finished all the update work in your area.
Oh, good.
We hope that it's more successful. It turns out I've had worse coverage than I've ever had in my home, to the point where I actually lose it nearly every day, non-stop, in every 5 minutes. And they are now sending me through a booster for my home that they wouldn't give me for free before.
Is this for your broadband?
No, this is for the mobile signal. Apparently,
oh, really?
They can boost those as well. Yeah.
I didn't know you could have. I didn't know you could get a booster for that. What does that look like then?
I'm not sure. They're apparently going to sort it out. I've got a complaint being dealt with. So.
Excellent.
Yeah. It's
well, you live in that sort of netherworld down there by Dorset, don't you, in the New Forest? So, I mean, what I can tell you, and I've said this many times, Brian, is that the signal in that part of the world, just to make a mobile telephone call, is pretty awful.
Well, I'm quite near Southampton. I'm just across the water, so I would expect to get the decent fallout from the metropolitan area, but I don't. It seems to cut off across the water. And then I've got an oil refinery the other side, which probably then scuppers all sort of mobile signal.
It probably does, but the further west you go, the worse it gets. I mean, I used to go and stay in Corfe Castle quite a bit, and you had to go to the top of the town, which was the highest point of the town, really, unless you wanted to climb up into the castle. And that was the only place I could actually make a phone call.
Well, let's say don't tell the flat earthers that, because that's one of the bases of their argument. There should be satellites beaming it down and not across, so hills shouldn't make a difference.
Well, it really shouldn't. In this day and age, it's absolute madness. Ryan, listen, thank you very much indeed.